Leeds Humanities Research Bites is a project of the Leeds Humanities Research Institute in the University of Leeds. I'm Matthew Traherne, Director of the Institute, and in this series of short recordings I'll be discussing with researchers from across the Faculty of Arts at Leeds recent publications. So I'm very pleased to welcome Max Silverman for the first of our Leeds Humanities Research Bites to discuss his recently published co-edited book, Concentrationary Cinema, Aesthetics as Political Resistance in Alain Resnais' Night and Fog, which he co-edited with Griselda Pollock. It was published in January 2012 by Berghahn Books, and contributors to the book include Georges Huberman, Sylvie Lindberg and Emma Wilson. And the book has recently been awarded the Kraszna-Krausz Prize as the best book on the moving image of 2011. So many congratulations, Max, on that achievement.
Thank you.
Very exciting news. I thought we might start by taking one of the words in the title of the book, which is the word concentrationary, which is perhaps an unusual word to hear, and certainly made me sort of prick my ears up and wonder why you'd chosen that particular word, and if you were intending anything particularly important by that word.
Yes, it's not a word that exists in English. If you look it up in the dictionary, you won't find it, and in fact, if you Google it, what comes up is the project that Griselda Pollock and I were engaged in, the AHRC funded project. So it doesn't exist. It does exist in French, and it is a term that was coined by returning deportees from the camps, from the concentration camps, in the aftermath of at the time of the liberation in 1945. And it was used by a number of them, and especially a person called David Rousset, who is mostly associated with the term, to describe initially the universe of the concentration camps. So it exists both as an adjective but also as a noun in French. And it was developed. It had a certain currency in France, but it never translated into English. And in fact, when David Rousset's famous book, which is called L'univers concentrationnaire, the concentrationary universe, was translated, concentrationary was not the term that was used. So there was a struggle as to how to translate it into English.
So by using the word concentrationary in English as opposed to alternative formulations like cinema of the concentration camps or so on, what do you feel that you're adding to the discourse by using
it's at the heart of the project that we've been engaged in, and it runs through the four books that are going to come out of this project, and they all have the word concentrationary in them. This is the first. The book that we're going to be talking about is the first of the four, called Concentrationary Cinema, and then it's followed by three others, all of which contain the term concentrationary. So it is a term that we consciously used, and it has a very particular significance for us. Initially, it's a way of distinguishing a particular concept from what has become known as Holocaust studies. So the book the film that this book is about is often known to be, or often called, the first great film about the Holocaust. And by using the term concentrationary, we're saying, but is it a Holocaust film? Is it a film that deals specifically with what we now understand as the Holocaust, which in most people's eyes designates the attempted genocide of the Jews? And what we're saying by reappropriating the term concentrationary is, no, it isn't. It isn't. It's about something else. It's about a system which attempted to dehumanize people in general and actually introduced a political possibility into the world that had not been done before. The famous German political theorist Hannah Arendt said that now everything is possible. In fact, it was David Rousset who coined that term originally, and then Hannah Arendt took it up. So it designates something that's been unleashed, something which is a new potential, which affects us all, which affects humanity, which redefines humanity, which redefines what we understand as the human, and it hasn't gone away. So that with the end of the camps and with the defeat of the Nazis, it doesn't mean to say that this thing that has been unleashed is actually has actually disappeared. Now, the Holocaust and the way Holocaust studies have developed, and the use of the film Night and Film within the category of Holocaust studies, doesn't necessarily get at that precisely, because it designates the genocide of a particular racialized group, the Jews, and sometimes Romani as well. So we felt the need to actually put it back into the context from which in which it was initially situated, to redefine what the concentrationary was, and then to resituate the film, take it out of Holocaust studies and try and see it in a different way.
So this idea of the concentrationary memory is something which informs the whole of the larger project that you've been working on with Griselda Pollock. Could you say a little bit about that project?
Yes. What the idea of the project was it was split into two parts. So the first part was to actually use the term the concentrationary to redefine what it was, and specifically to say there is an idea of concentrationary art that actually is linked to Rousset's concept of the concentrationary universe, and it is the creation of a particular art that can recognise the concentrationary and warn us of its continuation, and of the fact that it can reappear in different sites. It has not gone away. At the time that this film was made, in 1955, it's specifically a warning that we might think that we've gotten back to normality, that in the post-war world we are modernising, and that horrific past is now behind us. This is an art, then, that is going to say the concentrationary now unleashed is still with us. What are the forms that we can use to actually recognise the continued existence of the concentrationary in our midst, and carry on that warning, to be aware of its ruses and of its continued presence? And that, the idea of concentrationary art, is specifically associated with a French surrealist poet called Jean Cayrol. And Jean Cayrol was also in one of the camps. He was at Mauthausen camp, and wrote a lot about, formulated the idea of concentrationary art in given his own experiences and the experience of others like him in the camps. And it's his idea then that we're using as an art form. Art forms then that can recognise the concentrationary and warn us of its continued existence. That was the first part of the project, and that's why we started with this film Night and Fog. The second part of the project suggests that, following on from Cayrol's idea that this hasn't gone away, that it's there, it's lurking in different sites and different times, the second part of the project then suggests, is there something that we can identify as what we're calling a concentrationary imaginary? It's not easily identifiable because it's not explicit. But nevertheless, if Cayrol is right, that this thing is still with us, and it's up to us to find forms to actually locate it, because it can carry on dehumanising us, possibly without our knowledge. Is there something then that's been assimilated unconsciously into popular culture, which we can call the concentrationary, And that's why we're calling it an imaginary, and imaginary is obviously a difficult term to use. But something then that is working in a similar way, but unlike the film Night and Fog, which actually knew how to find a form to recognise what it was and then warn us of it. Now it's become assimilated into everyday life, and especially into popular cultural forms. Far more dangerous then, if that is correct, and this is a hypothesis, if that is correct, then that means that there are things going on in our cultural landscape which are possibly working in the same way, but we don't have the tools necessarily to actually identify it and then struggle against it, resist it, in the way perhaps that Night and Fog did.
Can you give an example of how that might work?
Yes, it might work, for example, in certain video games. Certain video games which use for entertainment. I think one can multiply this across perhaps a whole number of films as well, possibly in sort of post-apocalyptic films, which aren't necessarily always for entertainment, but could be, let us say for argument's sake, works then that are taking a particular model, if you like, for entertainment purposes, but the model that they're actually taking is one that is perhaps profoundly disturbing, and so the sort of violence that one gets and the sort of possible racialized communities and hierarchies of peoples that one gets in certain video games, not that I'm an expert, we're suggesting, are there then elements of what were initially in the post-war period identified as the concentrationary that have been absorbed into some of those forms, and especially with the development of new technologies and new media, there's the possibility of multiplying evil in different ways, perhaps without our understanding. We're talking here then about the value of a critical art, and of course that goes back to people like Brecht and Adorno and various others who are actually suggesting that we need a critical art, perhaps more so now, where not necessarily that we're totally numbed and anaesthetised against these things, because I think people still have critical faculties. But do we need then a concept like the concentrationary to actually re-engage with a critical art which can locate certain processes which are affecting us unconsciously, which we do need to grapple with, because they might be altering our humanity without us knowing. One other example that I can give of another theorist who we're engaging with in this idea is the Italian philosopher Agamben, Giorgio Agamben, and his idea of the camp as the new nomos of modern life. And his version of the camp is that the camp should not just be associated with the actual concentration camps of the Second World War, or even with other camps that have existed since the Second World War. So the camps not necessarily as as specific sites, but the camp as something far more amorphous, if you like, a sort of mentality or way of being or way of dealing with other people, which can appear and reappear in a whole host of different contexts. And that's far more dangerous, because we know about concentration camps and we know what they are, but what we don't know is that the same thing, or something very similar, that drove the concentration camps in terms of their dehumanizing potential and actuality, can exist in different forms.
So, to come back to the particular film that this book was engaged with, the film Night and Fog becomes a model both for the kind of critical thought that you're describing.
Yes.
But also the approach that you're taking to this film is in itself a development of that critical thought itself.
Yeah. Yes.
So I can see that it makes for your series of publications around this idea, then it makes a very valuable starting point. Could you say something about the film Night and Fog? Perhaps just introduce it to anyone who's familiar with it. Yes,
Night and Fog is a 30-minute documentary made by the French filmmaker Alain Resnais in 1955 to mark the 10th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, the liberation of the camps. It was Resnais was asked to do it as a sort of historical, an archive, as a document, if you like. He collaborated. He didn't want to do it on his own as a filmmaker. He wanted to do it with at least someone who had actually experienced the camps, and hence his collaboration with Jean Quérol, the writer. Jean Quérol wrote the script to the film. Resnais was the director, and Resnais and Quérol worked with the German musician Hans Eisler, who worked with Kurt Weill in Germany in the pre-war period, and with Bertolt Brecht before fleeing from Germany. So the film is about the period. It deals with the pre-1939 period, the run-up to the camps. It deals with the camps, and then it also is filmed in the present of Auschwitz. Not only Auschwitz, but mainly Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1955. And what it has is a very complex structure which goes between different time periods of pre-war, during the war, and the present of 1955. And through the different media, through image, sound, and spoken narration, it's going to use a whole number of devices to actually unsettle concepts of time, unsettle concepts of space, unsettle concepts of identity, and especially to, as we were saying before, unsettle the idea that this thing that has been unleashed has gone away. It's going to suggest that because of the overlaying of past and present, that the past is still in the present. So it's going to use a whole number of modernist devices, especially to actually create what Jean Quérol termed a concentrationary art.
And this is where your book brings to the fore the idea of the aesthetics of the film. Could you say something about how your book's re-evaluating the film and what the book's trying to achieve?
Yeah, because, as I was saying before, the film then has often been seen as the first Holocaust film. When it was made in 1955, the Holocaust as a term didn't exist in the way that we know it. The Holocaust only came about, we don't have time to go into all the detail, but it only came about through the famous series, American series called Holocaust, which did popularise that idea. Other things as well fed into what we now know as the Holocaust, but we're talking about 1960s and post-1960s. When this film was made, it wasn't known. It's now been called the first Holocaust film. Funnily enough, it only ever mentions the word Jew. It doesn't mention the word Jew, actually. It mentions the word Jewish as an adjective only once. So it's a rather strange thing that a film which doesn't explicitly engage with the genocide has actually been incorporated into what we now know as a film about the Holocaust and Holocaust studies. So that, as I was suggesting before, it was very important, we felt, to resituate the film. So what we're doing is to resituate the film, and we asked our contributors to resituate the film within its initial context and to engage with some of the major concepts, especially the idea of the concentrationary, that we felt have been lost in the way the film has been reappropriated.
In this idea of aesthetics as political resistance is part of that process, presumably.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit how that works, the idea of aesthetics as resistance?
Yes. So if we take some of the techniques that I was talking about before, one of them is to do with defamiliarizing everyday life. For example, a very familiar surrealist technique whereby the familiar becomes defamiliarized and becomes uncanny, using the Freudian concept of the uncanny. So the filming that takes place in the present in the film, the camera glides across what is now ruins, where nothing is to be seen. It starts with going between the outside landscape to Auschwitz-Birkenau, peaceful landscape, rolling. There were fields. There's a church spire, and then the camera pans into the camp itself. So it's setting up this relationship between the external and the internal, between everyday life and the world of horror. And it's actually going to suggest that it's going to defamiliarize our idea of what everyday life is, because it's actually going to suggest that these things are not two separate worlds. They're profoundly interconnected. And so what we've got is a whole number of devices, because what we find at the beginning of the film is that we don't know where we are situated. Although we think we're outside looking in, we find that the camera is actually positioned inside the camp, looking out. And so there's an uncertainty as to where our position is. There's going to be a whole host of uncertainties about what our role is as viewers, now seeing process, but also uncertainties as to where we're situated with regard to responsibility and complicity in the acts that took place within these camps. But so, in terms of in response to your question about how does one have an aesthetics of political resistance, a number of modernist devices then, and especially defamiliarizing the everyday, so that the objects that we see within the camp, the inert nature of the camp, are going to be sort of actualized. They're going to be made to show that they hide something else. That there's a decor here, which is one of the terms that's used in the film, but what lies beyond the decor? And that unless we understand that the invisible is as powerful here as the visible, and unless we understand that the everyday can actually hide horror because they are profoundly articulated, unless we do, then we are going to succumb to a sort of inertia and amnesia, which is highly dangerous. So what we need, therefore, is in aesthetics, we need techniques which can actually show us that the visible is not sufficient, that the visible hides something else, that everyday life, there lies within everyday life, there is something else going on. And if we don't have those techniques, if we can't actually see through the ruses of the everyday and the ruses of a becalmed landscape, then humanity is in danger. There's a menace, which is how the film ends up. There's a perpetual threat, and there is what Jean Quérol calls la peste concentrationnaire, the concentrationary plague, which is still with us.
So could you say something about the importance of the film in contemporary French society and culture?
Yes, it's had a very interesting history, as the film. It started off being objected to at the Berlin Film Festival of 1956 because of what it was saying about complicity. It has since become known as the most important film about dealing with the Holocaust, as I was suggesting before, and is often shown on television whenever there's an outbreak of racist violence or some sort of racist incident. It's very often shown. So school kids in France have grown up with this film. It's become embedded into the consciousness of many French people who know this film very well, but we wanted to come back to the film to say we know it in a particular way, especially in France, and it's been celebrated outside of France as well, but does it get known in the way that perhaps it should be interpreted and it should be understood?
Well, that seems like a good note to end our discussion on. Thanks very much indeed, Max, for sharing that. That was a very illuminating outline of both the project and this particular book. And congratulations again on the prize. It's tremendous that the book's been acknowledged in that way. So thanks very much, Max.
Thank you.